Everyone, Erica here with Autofluencer and Creators in Coffee, and we are here back again with Jacob Gettins. You might have heard him previously talking about brand partnerships, but we also mentioned one of his many, many things he does is podcasting. So you probably recognize him from his different podcasts. If you're an OG, you might remember his Piston Head podcast from back in the day. But he has three current podcasts: the Outerzone podcast, which is his Formula Drift podcast. He's got the Iron Drift King podcast, and then a newer podcast, the Anything podcast, which is a little more fun, a little more light, a little bit of anything topic. Jacob, you are our first podcaster that we've had on talking about podcasting. So welcome.
Thank you. It's something that kind of started by someone else forcing me into it. And then I found it very quickly. I loved the entire process, and it makes up a good chunk of my week. So it's been
Yeah.
a fun process.
How many hours now? I do want to go back in time and hear how you got started. I think there's a lot of, when we think of the creator economy, we think of creators, podcasting is a big part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to talk about how you got started. I know there's a lot of people that fanboy you, but now how many hours a week do you spend podcasting with three different podcasts?
Yeah, so it really depends on the week. What I will say is the Outerzone is probably the heaviest lift, just because of the amount of research and post-production that goes into it. Man hours total, and this isn't just me, and I can kind of break down the process as well. It's 8 total man hours for one episode to air when it comes to the Outerzone. So, and what that's divided behind is research, actual shooting of the show, audio engineering, and then video editing. That should give everybody kind of an idea of that level of show, which realistically speaking, in the grand scheme of like processed and highly edited shows, is actually pretty short. If you take a look at something like Radio Lab, I mean, they could put 600 to 700 hours into an episode. What that breaks down to essentially is about 2 hours of research before the show is usually what I end up doing. If you're a fan of the show, you know that there's some pretty interesting questions that come up. I do take a lot of pride in the amount of research that I do on all of my guests. Let's say about 2 hours of research there. About 2 hours to shoot the show, depending on how long it goes. Sometimes they go well over 2 hours, but that includes setup, a few other elements. I ship all the guest mics. So there's a little bit of back and forth to get all that stuff set up. So we're at 4 hours already. And then there's approximately an hour and a half to 2 hours of audio engineering that goes in every episode. Even though we ship everybody mics, doesn't always go well. There's a lot of things that can go wrong in a podcast. And then there's about 2 hours of video editing to cut the full show and then cut all the clips and get those produced. It's a lot. And I do work with two great creators on that. And they've become very close friends. Kyle, who does all the video editing, and then Jay, who's been my audio engineer almost since day one. So
oh my gosh, that's awesome.
He's done all the mastering, even back to the Piston Head Productions kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a lot of work.
So let's go back in time to Piston Head and getting started there. How did that happen? Were you like, I want to be a podcaster so bad? Or did you just start it?
We can go even further back than that. My dad, as a kid, told me that I need to get a job where I talk for a living because I've always been a talker. My whole family is.
Picture little Jacob, chatting him up.
I would make friends with anybody and everybody. Even as a kid, I would always I was just very inquisitive. I'd always we would go camping, and within 10 minutes, I was making friends with every other campsite and understanding who they are and where they're from. And I would report back to my dad and be like, hey, these people are from this place. And so I've always been very inquisitive, which now, having a very inquisitive 11-year-old, I understand how interesting that is, because my son is very, very close to how I was when I was that age, which I found out. That's kind of how I've been since a child. And then I started a YouTube channel called Piston Head Productions with a couple of friends years ago. It still updates every once in a while, but a friend of mine named Jesse, he was like, yo, podcasting is getting big. You should really get into it. I'm like, I don't know. It's a lot of work, whatever. He came from video production, TV production. And he's like, no, we should do one. Let's figure it out. So we did one initially years and years ago. The audio was bad. The video was okay. But in the process of doing that interview, I was like, oh, I kind of like this, because I was already doing interviews for YouTube. And I was like, well,
how long ago was this?
Probably 10 years ago is when that started. So it was kind of, Joe Rogan was really starting to blow up at that point. And I was trying to kind of ride that wave. And the first one was in a photography studio with a bunch of friends, and we talked about racing and even F1 stuff at that point. So it was really, really interesting. And then I just got hooked. And then it was like, oh, I could do more with this. And I started to use it to leverage to meet new people, and, met a lot of really cool people over the years because of it. Cause I kind of be like, hey, I have a podcast. Would you like to come on? And you have a pretty intimate conversation with people when it starts to go, even past 20 minutes. Like, you can get into a lot of I can get really deep really quick. And that's kind of how it went, and allowed me to meet a lot of really, really cool people that I would have had any other opportunity to talk to.
One quick about going deep with people and getting to know them. I joked, I never thought of this, but a good friend of mine who I've known for, I don't know, 8 years, 9 years, he was on a podcast and they asked him all these questions. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know you were from here. I didn't know you did this. I had no, because when you think about it, when you just have friends, you don't necessarily go deep in the same way a podcast does. So now I have a thing where I want all my friends to have to go on podcasts so that then you can hear, or like, because it's awkward and just like hanging out with someone to like interview them podcast style, right? Like, you don't want to push them that way. So it's such a great way. Encourage all your friends to go on podcasts. So you start to get into it, but a lot of people enjoy the interviewing and the concept, but they don't keep going, right? You kind of see all these kind of started podcasts that then fall off. For you, I mean, you've kept going, you've evolved, you have new podcasts, you've kept at it. When you first started, did you know you were going to keep going with it, or did that then become a goal, or did it just kind of happen because you enjoyed it so much?
At the Piston Head days, like there were weeks and months where I didn't get an opportunity to post, not because I didn't want to, just life happens. I always knew I wanted to continue to dive down this road. I mean, my show developed into a radio show for a little bit. I had a radio show for a year where I would like pre-record it and do that. And some of it was snippets from the podcast. So like, I knew I wanted to be in a broadcast scenario in some way. This was a very easy, obtainable way that I didn't need a broadcast license. I didn't need to go and work with a radio station or a studio. I could do it all myself. And at that time, the information was there to do it all. Now, like, you can research everything you need to know to build a podcast in 100 different ways, whether it's mobile, whether it's studio, whether it's audio only or whatever. Like, there's so much information out there now that like to start one is even easier. I did hear an interesting fact that like, if you make it over 10 episodes, you're in the top 5% of podcasts.
Okay, that's what I wondered about. Yeah.
Yeah, so many people drop out within 10 episodes. And I really think like for longevity, the biggest thing is build the infrastructure to make it easy. If you have to set things up, if you have to like, if there is a process to recording, you won't do it. Every time you add a point of friction, you increase the likelihood that it won't happen. So like, for this studio, this is like, if I turn to the right, I'm in my office. That's where my computer is. Like, you can see my computer in the background. So all I have to do now is turn to the left. Everything is set up, ready to go. I have an automation on my phone for like, like a home automation schedule. I press one button, all the correct lights turn on, the camera turns on. Everything is done. So I realized very early on, if I have to continue to set this up every time, I'm not going to do it. So having a dedicated space is incredible. It doesn't need to be big. It could literally be a closet. It could be a corner of one room. You could have to, like, my old setup, I had to wedge myself into the corner. At one point, I had to crawl under the desk to get to the corner of the room. But then it was always there ready to go. If I wanted to create, if I wanted to do something, it was just essentially like at that point, like turn on the microphone system, log into Audacity and start recording. And that's all I had to do.
Okay, so let's talk technical. So your advice to someone starting out, wanting to get into podcasting from an equipment standpoint, I don't want to name names, but I happen to know a person who I may or may not be my significant other, who like had this vision podcasting and went out and bought all this expensive stuff. And of course, he did it once. And, now we have all this nice equipment, which I don't use. From your standpoint, if you're advising someone, would you advise them to go get all this stuff? Or what would you say, like, hey, if you're going to start podcasting to see if you really like it, these are the must-have things?
I think the easiest one to start with is a decent microphone. You don't need to go and buy one of these. The Shure mics are incredible. They're very expensive. To put into perspective, between this microphone, the Cloud Lifter, and the Scarlett that all goes with it, this is probably $1,800. You don't need to do that. I would recommend getting a decent microphone though, because if the audio is not good, this is an audio interface. If the audio is not good, people will leave. So that is something I would recommend. Sennheiser AT2020 is a good version. A lot of the USB mics are really good. I would stay away from the Blue Yeti. They're just very peaky. They get loud. They're overly dynamic. The sound is a little bit too crisp. You want something that can pick up a lot of good low frequencies because that's soothing and lets people keeps people enthralled. When you get those very high peaky sounds, it can be a lot to the ear. And so that's something I would try and stay away from. What I can do, I don't have the name of it right in front of me, but I can send you the link and maybe we can put it in the podcast notes or something, of exactly the kit that I send all of the guests on the Outer Zone. The whole kit, I think, is $80. It's a microphone, an arm, and a set of headphones, and it's one cable. So you plug the headphones into the back of the mic, you plug the mic into your computer via USB, and it's all done, and it sounds great.
This is interesting. So when you told me this, I was like, whoa. And for official record, we are not a podcast. We are a vlogcast.
Okay. Got it.
Because we are YouTube only. We are not an audio. We're education only. We're not a proper podcast, which is why my equipment sucks. But maybe I'll buy your kit when you send it. So I loved this though, right? Because you are a proper podcaster, right? And you send all your guests a microphone. I mean, that's an investment, right? And why is that? How did you get started doing that? What made you be like, you know what, this is worth this investment?
I realized how often I would leave podcasts or YouTube videos or whatever as soon as I heard bad audio. And maybe that's just me, but the moment it would sound crackly or bad, I would just be like, I can't deal with this. I'm gone. And I knew if that's me, that's other people. I also knew, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. If I wanted to be taken seriously, if I wanted to do this, if I wanted to bring in partners, if I wanted to bring in brands, it had to sound great. So that was part of it. So once again, shouts out to Jay, my audio engineer. I said to him, give me a microphone that's less than $100 that is on Amazon so I can send it to people within 2 days notice so I can get guests on quickly. And then for the Outer Zone, the biggest benefit is now, and this maybe can kind of go back to like our other show. Now every driver has a professional audio setup that they can do more podcasts with, they can do more interviews, they can do YouTube videos with.
And they're going to think of you every time.
Well, that's definitely nice, but they keep it. I don't make them send it back. They I budgeted into the show. It's $100 loss leader, but the upside is the audio sounds great. My audio engineer is much happier with me. We can keep a lot of like presets when it comes to audio balancing. It speeds up production time. It speeds up just everything. So that $100 that I'm spending is saving me that in headaches and labor and fall off in the episodes. So it's something when we launched the Outer Zone, that's something we mandated was going to happen.
From a camera standpoint, talk about the evolution of cameras. Like, where are you at now? What did you start with? What would you recommend for someone just getting started? And do they have to do video? What are the pros and cons of doing video?
You can start with a laptop. It's not a bad idea. I do recommend doing video. It's one of those, I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. About 50% of the audience watches the videos versus listens only. So it's there. People will want to watch it. There is something compelling about seeing the reactions of people, seeing what they look like. There's a lot of brand recognition. Obviously, I've branded myself with this hat. If it was audio only, this whole hat gimmick thing would never have worked. Definitely something I would say is worth it. Laptop camera can work. If you want that camera to look a little bit better, make sure you have a decent light. That can just be sit next to a window during the daytime. You can go on Amazon and just get like, this is a Neeweer, softbox light. They're like $30. They're super cheap. From there, my next step up would be take a look at a high quality webcam, something that does 4K. One step up from there, a lot of Canon, Sony, and Panasonic cameras now have the ability to use them as a webcam. Panasonic GH5 is what I used previously. You can probably pick them up for a few $100 now. You can download the Lumix software, plug it right in. Alternatively, if it has a HDMI out, you can do that and then plug that into a USB capture card. Now you can use that camera for it, get a battery backup or a dummy battery for the camera so it doesn't turn off. The Lumix ones are my preference, which is made by Panasonic. That's what I've always used. I love those cameras. There's a lot of great things about them. So right now, this episode and all of my episodes are shot on Panasonic S1H, which is a Netflix certified 6K cinema camera. Total overkill. You don't need this. It's something I bought because I was doing video production for a living. So I already
Right.
owned it.
Right.
Phenomenal camera. So many great things about it. And the biggest benefit is I can use it. I can plug in USB-C and use it directly as a webcam, or I can do what we're doing now, which is HDMI into a capture card into my laptop and then go from there. So multiple options. I would recommend doing video. And then as you feel necessary, start to up your video game at that point.
Last question that comes up when people think about, oh, maybe I want to be a podcaster. And then the next thing they think is, can I get paid to do that? How do I make money being a podcaster? So when you started out, how long before you were actually able to get any money, monetization from it, or, money from an actual sponsor? Like, how long did that take? How big did you all need to be before that happened?
The Piston Head podcast, there were two sponsorship things that we did. We did one paid slot in the history of the whole show, and it was for a company called Quick Latch. They make hood latches and bumper latches. Pretty good deal. I think we were 60 episodes in. We had a pretty good listener base at that point. Kind of pitched them, did it. Everybody was pretty happy with it. I didn't mind it. We did do the automated ad placement stuff. It does okay. I would not expect to pay your bills with it. My goal was to utilize the money from any of that stuff to then upgrade equipment. That was kind of how I utilized it. You could also go like the Patreon route if you have a good fan base, make some money off that. Not something we ever got into. Obviously, with the Outerzone and the Iron Drift King, that is a paid slot now for me. That is something I was hired to do. I did open a separate company that's called Monkey Bug Productions that does all that podcast stuff. We also do some with the video editor and the audio engineer. We do some post-production for other shows now, which is great. It does take a while to make money off of it. I went a little bit different of a route to get there. What I would say is don't look at it as a direct way to make money. Look at it as a way to meet a lot of people. Look at it as a way to make money in other ways. So great business connections.
Good advice.
Yeah. Now with Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok creator funds, and even YouTube's creator funds, pull shorts out of it, pull clips out of it. You are more likely to make money on the viewership there than you are out of anything else. That is going to be a much easier way to do it is pull clips, make sure that you meet all the requirements to get into the creator funds, into those programs, and make money that way. I would say more money has been made that way than pretty much any other route, unless you're hired to do the show. You can make a good chunk of change on TikTok.
Well, thank you for those up and coming podcasters. This is obviously a must listen. So many great tips. Jacob, thank you. As always, you are awesome. So much great information, and hope to see you again.
Thank you so much. And for anybody listening, if you want to start a podcast, just do it. Just make it happen and make it consistent and make it easy on yourself. And the rest is pretty straightforward.
Awesome. Great advice. Thank you so much, Jacob. Take care. Bye.